Since the start of Disney Cruise Line in 1998, the company has always had a private island experience for the majority of their Caribbean and Bahamian sailings. It's called Castaway Cay, and it's proven to be one of the most popular and beloved private island experiences in the industry. But Disney Cruise Line is expanding, and now, after a quarter of a century, the cruise line has opened its next private destination experience, Lookout Cay at Lighthouse Point. So join me today to see if Disney Cruise Line's newest private destination offering lives up to the vast competition in the industry, and see if it's worth the price to get there. Disney Cruise Line launched in 1998 with a strong entry into the market. They started out with one ship, the Disney Magic, a custom-built cruise terminal, and a private island, Castaway Cay. The island was unique though. It was born out of the idea from their previous cruise partner, Pier Cruise Line. Pier would send out a single ship to a private beach in the Abacos, and they hosted a very unique themed out-island experience. When Disney partnered with the brand in the mid-1980s, it became a pirate-themed nighttime excursion with characters like Captain Hook. They would climb aboard the cruise ship and send their passengers to the island for a midnight buffet. It was a really interesting idea and a really unique place. Though after the fall of Pier, the property in the Abacos would sit abandoned. It's of course a story I cover on my main channel along with an interview from the former CEO. Anyways, Disney would disband their partnership with ambitions to go off and do their own cruise product, DCL being the result of that. They would purchase the island Gorda Cay and rename it to Castaway Cay and create their own bespoke out-island experience, one of the greatest examples in the whole industry. Today, the island is beloved by guests, and in my opinion, it is the best private destination offered by any cruise line. But with the promise of future expansion in the Disney fleet, the company would begin efforts to search for another island destination. This was roughly in the mid-2000s, but nothing would ever materialize. Years would pass until the mid-2010s, when the line was once again expanding with the promise of new vessels. One singular island destination, only capable of holding one ship per day, well, it just wasn't enough. So in June of 2016, it was reported that Disney was interested in purchasing Egg Island, a small piece of land around 60 miles south of Castaway Cay. Disney would conduct environmental studies on the island, but they would ultimately choose not to move forward after those evaluations proved that development would be too intrusive to the island's natural habitats. So the company went back on the hunt, ultimately proposing the purchase of a plot of land on the southern tip of the island of Eleuthera. The peninsula, called Lighthouse Point, was already on the market for $20 million, and Disney began preliminary negotiations in May of 2018, eventually making an official proposal by August. Clearly, this was already a very sensitive development, as local groups began opposition organizations clearly against any major development on the site. Disney, meanwhile, clarified their proposal and argued that less than half of the land would be developed, particular areas would be donated back to the government, and that the project as a whole would benefit the island. Disney also emphasized their design philosophy with this project, assigning famed Imagineer Joe Rohde on the project and spending a decent chunk of their 2019 D23 hyping it up, but also easing the nerves of those environmental groups. This property was interesting though. It's around 880 acres of land, and is also south of the existing Carnival and Princess Cruise Line's private destination. Theirs, however, is a comparatively tiny stretch of beach that offers little amenities, theming, and has no pier, opting instead to tender guests ashore. Finally, the project was confirmed after the Bahamian Prime Minister signed off on the land purchase in 2019. The company also released their master plan intentions for the site, and it was very impressive. Lighthouse Point would have everything from an extensive series of nature trails to various beaches. A massive adventure camp would occupy the western half of the site, with various zip lines, water slides, and lookout towers, while a spa and wellness area would have its own dedicated site. Illustrations also depicted various pavilions dotting the east and south beaches, along with an access pier that had its own tram system running out to meet the ship. Not included for ship guests, but there would also be large parcels of land allocated for public use, including a public conservation center. This was all very exciting, but in typical Disney Parks fashion, it was then hit by budget cuts. An updated plan was revealed in late 2020, this time simplifying the overall design a bit, losing the tram to the ship and relegating aspects like the spa, adventure camp, and South Beach as future development. Regardless, Lighthouse Point's development continued, and despite Imagineer Joe Rohde's retirement halfway through the project, the site on Eleuthera saw slow progress through the early 2020s. Finally, though, things were coming together, and Disney announced that both the Magic and the Fantasy would make inaugural trips there starting in June of 2024. They also announced a name change, now to Lookout Cay at Lighthouse Point. For me personally, I would choose the later sailing, hoping that the initial kinks of the site would be worked out and that the property would be in a more complete state. So I embarked on a 4-night cruise aboard the Disney Magic out of Fort Lauderdale. And yes, a full review on the Disney Magic will be coming very soon. So subscribe to the channel if you want to hear my thoughts on Disney's original flagship. But before we step off the ship and onto the island, I want to take a moment and thank this video's sponsor, Surfshark. I was recently traveling in Europe, and oftentimes the shows and movies I usually watch on streaming services here in North America aren't available in certain countries. That's where Surfshark really comes in handy for me. When I was traveling, I could just connect to one of their 3,200 plus servers across over 100 countries and easily enjoy the content I can only get at home. And of course it works vice versa. If a show or movie is only available on Netflix UK, for example, you can simply join a Surfshark UK server and you're good to go. You also get a whole host of security features, including protection from potential dangers posed by using public Wi-Fi networks, as well as added privacy from your own ISP at home. They also offer 24/7 customer support, and if you aren't totally loving it, you can also get a 30-day money-back guarantee. Really, it's a tremendous value, as you can use Surfshark on an unlimited number of devices across just one account. So if you want to try it out for yourself and also get a particularly special deal from today's video, you can go to surfshark.deal/BST and enter the code BST to get 4 extra months for free. I really like sponsors like this, as they not only provide a valuable service, but also help me create these videos by offsetting some of the vast expenses, especially when it comes to traveling on Disney. Alright, let's head over to Lookout Cay. So our arrival was beautiful, as our ship was met with turquoise blue water and a vast island in the distance. We were also met with a very, very long pier. For most passengers, especially those on the first few cruises to Lighthouse Point, this was a pretty controversial aspect of the experience. Some think it's far too long, and others think it's just fine. I'm somewhere in the middle. The walk looks very daunting from up above on the ship, and in some ways, it is rough when you're actually on the pier and walking. In the blazing sun, a half-mile walk begins to feel strenuous. And because it's without any sort of shade or covering, you're either stuck on a windy pier during a rainstorm like some people were on our voyage, or in the blistering heat with very little relief like we were this morning. What really should have been done here was to extend the tram all the way to the ship. And it seems like Disney originally agreed with me on that. As an official submitted schematics and plans, that's exactly what they were going to do. Obviously that wasn't built in, and now the only way to get a ride is on a golf cart if you're a Cabana guest, or if you require special assistance. I'm willing to bet budget cuts are to blame here, but it's also possible that there were logistical or construction limitations that required it to be cut. But to be clear, the fact that there is any pier is a good thing, as like I mentioned earlier, Carnival's Beach north of Lighthouse has none, and requires all passengers to tender. It's also purposeful in its design, as an open trestle pier at this length was necessary to disturb as little underwater terrain as possible. But I also understand why people hate this thing. On Google Maps, this is marked as the Bob Chapek Pier and has 1 star, which is just great. Once you actually make it to the island, you're met with some hits and some misses. I really like the cement ground embedded with shells and sea glass, and the views of the ship behind you are very cool. But then there's the buildings themselves, which in some areas, especially in this entrance plaza, feel a bit plain and almost a bit generic. Some are basically just stucco, beige square buildings with a cutout for a stall. It honestly reminds me of the generic building blocks in Planet Coaster. Bada bing bada boom, I've made a Disney Lighthouse Point building. But to give some credit to them, I do like the pops of color on the buildings, as well as the vinyl artwork scanned from a real Bahamian artist. Atop many of these buildings are wavy tiles that appear to be real. Perhaps most indicative of the budget cuts is the main sign itself, which is a relatively small, flat sticker which is quite unimpressive. Disney originally stated that they plan to invest between $250 and $400 million into the site. But I will let you judge if that money has actually tangibly materialized yet. Now, just south of this entrance is the Family Cabanas, a premium option for those willing to pay quite a bit extra for their own luxurious cabana on a private beach overlooking the ship. Here there are two types, a standard cabana, which on our voyage was $963, while a larger Grand Family Cabana, which there are only 4 of, are $1,375. Honestly, they are pretty lavish and well appointed, with food delivery services and many other amenities. Though, despite them being a family cabana area, they are very far from the current family beach area, and they're also not that private, being situated next to the hustle and bustle of the primary port of entry. Though all of this looks great when you compare it to what other cruise lines offer, like Royal Caribbean at their island, Lookout Cay. A significantly worse cabana with less amenities and less luxury on their island starts at $900, where a more comparable cabana starts at an offensive $1,700. What? Anyways, past security, you board a tram which will bring you to the rest of the property. Currently, there's only one tram stop, that being the East Family Beach, which at this point is the only major guest area on property. There you can find all that Lookout Cay has to offer. On the way there, a very cute and charming audio narration plays, introducing the new characters of Lighthouse Point. In fact, Disney has created a whole host of completely original characters after the native animals that live on the island, and these characters can be spotted all around. I honestly love this. I think they absolutely nailed it. It's fun, it's authentic, and it's original IP, which is always a refreshing touch. While you're on your way, you'll also notice that the property is very much not finished and very much still under construction. The journey across the property winds through unfinished roads, unopened bike pathways, entrances to literal construction sites, and closed off future nature guest trails. But at the end of the 15-minute tram ride, you arrive at the Goombay Cultural Center, which is the hub for basically all of the current amenities on the property. There, you'll notice the immediate land feels quite sparse, as much of the foliage has just been planted and is nowhere near fully grown in. That allows for some unintended sightlines to be possible, like this large, obviously backstage object tied down, as well as other unsightly infrastructure elements. We decided to walk south and check out the only open nature trail which leads to the lighthouse where the property gets its namesake. It's perched on top of a large cliff, which in itself is extremely beautiful. Though it was unbelievably hot the day we filmed this, well beyond miserably hot. So honestly, this was a very unpleasant, almost dangerous trek. But I do appreciate the periodic water stations and seating areas, though none of which are under shade. The historic lighthouse is cool to see, and the view from this perspective is stunning. Was it worth the walk in this kind of heat? No. At the southernmost end of the family beach, there's a point where you reach the end of the life-guarded beach section. And with its proximity to the reef and rec bar, it's an excellent and quiet area to sit and swim, especially if you walk further down the beach. And this is where Lookout Cay really shines. The beaches on the east end of the property are absolutely spectacular, with soft pink sand and water which is truly unbelievably clear and blue. This was among some of the best beach experiences I've ever had, well beyond what other cruise lines offer at their private destinations, and that also includes Disney's other cruise stop, Castaway Cay. The beaches here are truly spectacular. Once you start walking north, up the developed family beach area, you'll notice that the beach has effectively 2 sections for seating. One on the beach itself, with chairs and loungers that do get snatched up pretty quickly, while there's a larger seating area higher up behind the dunes. On the Disney Magic, a ship that holds far fewer guests than their larger ships, the capacity didn't seem to be a huge issue, as it seems like guests were well distributed. We heard some complaints, but not a ton. Though on the larger ships, like the Disney Fantasy, there have been many reports of people hard-pressed to find open chairs, some even starting verbal arguments. This is something Disney can fix rather easily, just by producing more seating options. Though it would really help if they just built the South Family Beach to really alleviate some of the pressure here. Around this area is where you're going to find Sebastian's Cove, a gated-off youth activities area where you can drop your kids off and let them play. It looks fun and fine enough, though the youth activities on Castaway are far more extensive in space and amenities. activities. Adjacent to it is the Play Pavilion. See, it's not sitting abandoned in Epcot. Actually, this is the Play Pavilion, and it's a nice sheltered area for families to do activities in. True Barbecue is one of 3 public areas to eat at Lookout Cay, and it's an expansive area with a lot of concrete and not a whole lot of shade. The section consists of one central food area with stations wrapping around it, and then these sectioned off, unique looking shade structures with seating underneath. I think these eating areas are actually really cool, and feature unique architecture that fits in with the unique landscape. The plaza itself, though, is hot and pretty Spartan. There isn't really a whole lot of shade here, and the vastness of the area makes the walk to and from the food stations feel a lot longer and more formal. Now, the second biggest controversy here at Lighthouse Point is that the property has been dealing with a massive infestation of flies around the food area. It was a massive problem initially, but it looks like it has been mostly rectified here at the family eateries. These food stations were also divided up by temporary unpotted plants, while big-ass fans helped deter those flies away from the food. Measures like these, plus covering up the serving dishes and each table having their own fan, seem to have helped a lot. But it hasn't helped everywhere, and I'll get into that soon along with the actual food quality itself. Further north, you'll find a smoothie station and a bar, both of which are elevated on a small ridge of rocks. Below is a decently sized water park called Rusho Gusho. It was closed during our stop due to low water pressure, and while the concept art made this area look a lot more impressive, I do still like it. The structures themselves have colorful roofs, some covered with genuinely beautiful artwork. They also have more unique design elements than I would have expected, like these 3-dimensional sculptures hanging within. There are also plenty of shopping opportunities, from your standard Disney merch to a full co-op with authentic and local Bahamian vendors, something I genuinely really do appreciate. This is also where you'll find the actual Goombay Cultural Center building, a decently sized pavilion with an impressive curved roof. Facing the beach is a colorful arch framing a multi-purpose space where guests can come and learn about Bahamian culture and create crafts alongside real artisans. It's also the ending spot for the twice-daily Junkanoo celebration. This was great. It's called Rush, a Junkanoo celebration, and it's a parade of Junkanoo performers with music and colorful costumes, all concluding in a big celebration at the Cultural Center under the arch. I absolutely loved this. I should also mention that all of this is connected by elevated wooden pathways, an effort to not disturb the ground level of flora and fauna. It does make traversing the site a bit confusing, and that is even more exacerbated by the lack of directional signs and temporary maps, though I do for the most part like the landscape it creates. I also like the music that is pumped in around these areas, sometimes even playing the original song created for the property, and I like how there are sections for trees to break up the space. After passing by another bar and food area, this time being True Barbecue 2, you'll find yourself at Serenity Bay, the only adults-only area on the whole property. And what you'll find here is not a whole lot. Serenity Bay does have a few cabanas, just 7 in total, that are much cheaper. They start at a reasonable $523. The section of beach here is also pretty small, and as you might have noticed, it's not really disconnected from the main family beach area. It's on the same stretch of beach that was honestly pretty busy throughout the day. The line between the family beach and the Serenity Bay beach is not really all that clear. But interestingly, because this site backs onto land Disney has donated back to the government, you can continue walking down the beach outside of Disney property, where you'll find a stretch of sand all to yourself. For that matter, really anyone can come here whether you're on a cruise or not. Eventually Disney will build a public conservation center and a public parking lot for beach access, and there really is nothing stopping a regular person from wandering onto the Disney site. In fact, there have already been cases of people boating to Eleuthera and walking on to the Lookout Cay property. Overall though, Serenity Bay is pretty disappointing, and I wish they had built it in a completely different area on the site. Perhaps like the originally proposed South Beach area. That would be a much better isolated place for adults only, and you can extend this beach all the way down for families. There is also another adults-only barbecue area, a much less impressive example than the family eateries elsewhere. Lunch was shutting down at around 2 p.m., and by this point in the filming of the property for this video, we ended up here just prior to close, so this is where we ate. The actual quality of the food being served here is very good. There are plenty to choose from, with multiple meats including ribs, barbecue chicken, and grilled fish, all on offer, while fruit including mango are also available. I got some grilled fish options, which were fantastic, as well as a pineapple salad and some baked mac and cheese. All were very good. The only problem was that apparently all the flies that were deterred from the family barbecue area have seemingly made their way here. This area was a complete mess. Even with the fans blowing and the food trays covered, flies were swarming everywhere. Basically, between bites of food, I had to cover my plates with my napkin. It was extremely bad. Employees definitely noticed how rough my situation was, and over the course of like 10 minutes, they kept giving us more fans in our losing battle. This was just very bad, and it only amplifies how unfinished and unprepared Disney was with bringing actual paying guests to this property. And that's very annoying because not only is the site unfinished, with promised activities like bike rentals not even being ready by the time we got there, but there were also seemingly obvious infrastructure problems you would think would have been thought of. Lookout Cay lacked a lot of these amenities, like enough places to put your towel or even a place to put your cup. Guests were stacking used utensils on top of every trash can available. A lack of shade and seating were also a big problem I identified. And the searing heat was not just a problem for guests, but also a problem for the workers, most of whom came off our ship to work on the island. I spoke to a few of them, and it was clear that their job was particularly brutal on the island, working long hours with little shade and breeze. Then many of these workers had to go back to the ship and then work 2 hectic dinner shifts. It's absolutely brutal, and the employees on the island need better relief. What actually should have been done here was to delay revenue sailings to Lighthouse Point, give everyone who originally booked 50% off, invite the residents of Eleuthera to come to the property, and test it out like it was a regular cruise. Not only would they have had time to install more fixtures and add an overall level of polish to the site, but they would have obviously identified major problems with the flies and other logistical challenges. Instead, they allowed the inaugural sailing aboard the Disney Fantasy, with guests paying at minimum $5,200 for an inside cabin to be the beta testers here. But at the end of the day, this is the Walt Disney Company we're talking about. They have been building themed physical properties for over 60 years, so they really can't plead ignorance here. This is not a complete product, and people like me paid inflated prices to be here were only met with a gauntlet of flies, broken attractions, and a seemingly lack of obvious amenities like shade, benches, and a place to put your cup. And sure, there's growing pain for everything. But again, this is a place people paid thousands for, in some cases tens of thousands of dollars. This is also a place Disney's been talking about for 5 years. As I was walking around the site one last time before heading back to the ship, I spent some time looking at the details, and I really do like many of them. They don't go unnoticed. I like the carving on the doors. I like the more subtle Disney character photo ops, even though only one was installed when we went. I like the tiling on the top of the structures, the art installations, the informational plaques spread around the property. But I also can't help compare this to Disney's other cruise destination, Castaway Cay. It has had 26 years to evolve over time, yes, but it was also built in an era of Disney that no longer exists. And it has mostly been unchanged since the late 1990s, which really just goes to show how timeless it is. It's a very different overall vibe and theme there, but when I look at the two, I can't help but think there's a lot more depth and character compared to Lookout Cay. Castaway, for example, has a runway element that Disney inherited prior to their development, and instead of just removing it, they kept the abandoned runway and made it into a feature of the island and themed amenities around it. In fact, they themed the whole island story around it. Abandoned planes and props line it. In fact, many guest pathways have subtle theming. When you look at the buildings themselves, there's a lot of depth architecturally. Even infrastructure-wise, look at a restroom on Castaway. It has props, it has color, it has various textures, and a bit of whimsy. Then look at one at Lookout Cay at Lighthouse Point. It's flat, it's beige, it's modern with no depth outside of the canopy. Same with the many bars here. Look at this bar at Lighthouse Point. Again with very flat, muted colors, and not much visual interest outside of the carved plank of wood. Then compare it to the Castaway Air Bar, which has a visually interesting building, thematic props everywhere, and some really nice seating around it. But again, Castaway has a different theme, so maybe you can argue that an extrapolation of Bohemian culture materialized as a Disney Cruise Line resort can only go so far. But then you look at the concept art of what was originally planned. Take the Goombay Cultural Center in art from 2022. It shows a textured Bohemian arch with depth, while in reality, it's just a flat panel. The stairs out front show artwork cascading down the steps, where in actuality it's just the same wooden steps as everywhere else. The pillars holding up the roof have textured rope and braiding with lanterns dangling down, none of which are present in the finished product. Even the back walls have texture and wooden trim that has depth, where in reality it's just a flat concrete wall with flat color. It's just stuff like that. It's small details that Imagineers put in purposely, and it might not seem substantial, and it might be an easy cut on the budget, but I think people really do pick up on that. And when you compare the finished product between what was originally proposed and what we have now, it's pretty substantial. And honestly, it's why I think Castaway Cay is just a better overall destination. But with all that being said, I don't dislike Lookout Cay at Lighthouse Point. It does have a lot of strengths, the beach being its primary one. I really like that it's not themed to any Disney IP, and that it's a physical representation of Bahamian culture. I think that's great, and since my trip here, I've thought about that idea a lot more, and I've grown a lot more fond of the whole property over time. But it also struggles from a lot of issues, both logistical and cuts made to the creative vision. It needs time to grow, literally, and I hope over time the company invests in bringing the standard of Disney theming and architectural depth to the same level as Castaway Cay, or perhaps even something like Animal Kingdom, which shares similar cultural ideologies. But for right now, I would choose to go to Castaway. Regardless, both of Disney's cruise destinations are much better than the competition in my opinion. The other private destinations don't hold a candle to what Disney offers. I mean, just look at Carnival's other island, Half Moon Cay, Norwegian's Great Stirrup Cay, and I know this might be controversial, but even Royal Caribbean's Coco Cay. Honestly, that island is just too much for me, and it kind of represents everything wrong with the cruise industry. I know that's a loaded statement, but that's a topic for a different video. Lighthouse Point is just so much more restrained and premium by comparison. There's also something to be said on the environmental impact too. Disney Cruise Line is definitely one of the better cruise operators, if not the best when it comes to environmental consciousness and responsibility. Lighthouse Point continues that trend with committing to produce zero landfill waste and drawing its power from 90% renewable sources. Plus, their use of the land is only a small fraction of the overall site, and it does appear that Disney has been acting in good faith with the land they were entrusted with. It's also worth noting what Disney has done to their land compared to what other companies have proposed for Lighthouse Point. The differences are pretty shocking. So that's my take on Lookout Cay at Lighthouse Point. It's been a Disney project I have been following for years and eagerly anticipating. I promise you, I wanted to like this so much, I swear to you. This has been the only Disney project in recent memory I have actually been excited for, and in many ways, it's the only large-scale modern Disney project I actually enjoy. It's also a big deal since it's the first major project that's not based on an IP in a while. So it's good to see some originality coming from the company. As you know, I got here aboard the Disney Magic, and I of course filmed an entire review of that ship, which will be coming out on this channel very soon. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you want to hear my honest thoughts on Disney's original and oldest ship. I also am curious on what your thoughts are on Lighthouse Point. Do you think I'm being too nitpicky and harsh? Did I miss anything here? And what do you think they should add? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you there. But until then, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.